What's up guys, today we'll be finishing up Gladiator Part 3 and we'll be focusing on his moveset animations. Before we start with that though, I have two things I need to say. First, this is the last Gladiator video, so that means it's time to vote on a new hero to do. I'll have a link to the community poll in the pinned comment down below. I'll also have it in the description. Make sure you go vote because in a week I will use that to make a decision on who to focus on next. Second, I forgot a few things to mention in the last part of the Warmonger analysis, and usually if it wasn't pretty interesting I would have just let it slide, but I actually really wish I mentioned it in the original video. If you haven't watched the original video, feel free to watch that after this one if you'd like to get caught up. One thing that a few people mentioned that I missed was Warmonger's zone attack. That is one thing that I missed, and I don't particularly care that I missed. If you remember me talking about edge control with only one hand on the blade, then you can make a safe assumption that it would affect this here. Next we have the Parry Punish. Now I covered her Parry Punish impale in the original video, but I didn't mention what happens when out of stamina and what happens when you pin the opponent to a wall. Let's start with the less interesting of the two, which is the latter. So when you carry your opponent all the way to a wall, which I already mentioned is inherently odd to begin with, you can then pin them to the wall and do a weird spinning scratch thing. Setting aside the spin, as I could definitely get on my soapbox for that, the whole concept of claws on the gauntlet is ridiculous. To keep it short, it is some real mall ninja shit that could possibly break your fingers and not have any real plausible place in combat. Let's look at the out of stamina Parry Punish, and this one has a lot more going for it. Here we can see that you don't carry the opponent anywhere and instead you displace them and then they fall back from being unbalanced. You then proceed to do the impale with them against the floor with a half sorting technique. Now the animations do look a bit rough, but that's not really news. That being said, half sorting is a situational technique, and one of the most popular situations we see it being used for in historical manuals is finishing off your opponent while they are on the floor. When half sorting, you get a lot more point control, which will help you get under the gaps of plate armor in an armored duel. I think it's great and I'd love to see more of it, but this isn't a Warmonger video, so let's get back to the hero at hand, Gladiator. Like usual, we will be starting with the stances. One of the issues with reviewing this hero's stances is that it wasn't made in the mindset of being very practical. In the launch trailer for when Gladiator was released, they mentioned his fighting style is meant to portray a boxer. Unfortunately, unarmed combat versus armed combat doesn't always correlate well with each other. I'll try to explain more as we go along. To start, the Gladiator has 4 stances due to his reflex guard. He has his neutral stance, his left guard, his right guard, and his top guard. For his neutral stance, you can see that he keeps his arms close to his body. This is the best example that shows off his boxer-like aesthetic. The problem is that this is a very poor stance both offensively and defensively for someone using a buckler and trident. There aren't many manuscripts of a buckler being paired with a trident, but if we were to use the buckler and sword manuscripts and just replace the sword with the trident, we would get some pretty interesting results. First of all, with such a small defensive tool like a buckler, it does you no good with it so close to your body. It is much more effective at defending your other hand while you advance and keeping it presented forward to create distance. Especially since if you keep your buckler close to your body, if your opponent were to get past your defenses, then it would be much easier to strike you, contrary to keeping your distance and only exposing your buckler arm at most. Another thing that makes these stances so poor is a lack of weapon presentation. None of these stances pose a threat to the opponent. The simplest yet most effective way to go about this would be to simply point it in the opponent's direction. Having it pointed down does nothing unless, of course, you were planning on stabbing your opponent in the foot. We'll get to that point later. Let's look at the blocks from each stance. For light block, you can see that he punches out to meet the attack. This is similar to the other shield heroes as well. He wouldn't have to overextend himself if he were already at the extended length in the first place. As for the heavy attacks, he just recoils back like most other heavy attack blocks. Now for parries, I think it's a bit interesting because he stops the opponent's attack with his buckler and then controls their weapon with his trident. I could see this being very plausible and is actually close to some techniques that we already have with sword and buckler. Let's move on to attacks now, looking at the light attacks. Each light attack on all sides are just quick jabs and are relatively the same no matter which point in the combo. I like the idea of quickly jabbing being the light attack, but it could be a better animation by using the buckler to defend while moving forward. For example, in sword and buckler, even when throwing a cut, the buckler follows a sword guard to provide extra protection. Besides that though, I think this is a pretty solid use for a light attack. Next, we have the heavy attacks. The opener heavy is very interesting. As you can see, he uses his offhand to help guide the trident, which shows that he can be using both hands on the weapon and the buckler wouldn't get in the way. It also shows a much more powerful stab, which for this kind of weapon I think is a very appropriate choice. The heavy finisher is where we get an interesting choice. He follows up either a light or heavy jab with a swinging hit with the head of the trident. Now, when we looked at different trident heads at his disposal, we saw some where the prongs have an edge to them, so those do seem to be usable with a swinging motion. Not all of them were like that though. It makes me wonder how effective a move like that could possibly be, especially with blunt force only working really well when there's weight behind a moving object, and I can't see a trident being awfully heavy. Moving on, we have the sprinting attack. This is just like the Centurion sprinting attack, where they jump a few feet in the air and then land on their opponent. It's just as ridiculous as before. Jumping attacks don't work in real life. You will just get yourself skewered on the opponent's weapon when they see you coming. Next, we have the dodge forward light, and I'm fairly certain that it's the same animation for the sprint attack. Next, we have the side dodge lights. They have the same type of jab as the normal light attacks. I do think that it's interesting how floaty he looks whenever he does his dodge attacks. It kind of reminds me of Renaissance painting depictions. Regardless, besides the floatiness, it's about the same as the original lights. Next, we have the dodge bash attack. We've covered bashes on other shield heroes, and like I said before, getting clocked with the shield is going to be pretty rough for the receiving end. That being said, if you are in close enough quarters to be using a buckler offensively, things are going down fast. Not saying it isn't done, of course, it's just that realistically you're grappling at that point, which means that something other than getting punched with a buckler is going to be happening, and it will be fight ending pretty soon. Next, we have what we've all been waiting for, and that is the toe stab. I know I'm going to be bursting everyone's bubble here, but it's just impractical on pretty much every front. Going for someone's legs in general is already a risky move because you leave your entire upper half open for attack, but to go for something even further down and non-critical while leaving your vital organs and head exposed, no one in their right mind would do that. Pair that with the fact that he doesn't even do it from a distance, he closes the gap first. It's just not practical in any capacity and requires a lot of what ifs to be even considered a viable choice. Next, we have the skewer. It is essentially the heavy opener, but then it applies bleed. Just like the heavy opener, I think it has a lot going for it. It's over the top, but I get that's kind of the point. Finally, we have the zone attack. It is just not good. He does an airplane thing with his arms and then spins around. It looks weird. Even if there wasn't some form of edge alignment involved with the final swing, it still doesn't look like a good idea to do a full spin and put your back to the enemy. Most spin moves can be achieved without spinning. I think that's it. If I didn't mention something, it's probably because it wasn't interesting enough. His guard breaks. Or because I'm an idiot and I forgot. This video was suspiciously shorter than previous ones, so hopefully it just happens to be an exception. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, or reminders of any other moves I forgot to add, let me know down below. If you like these videos and you want to see more, please make sure to subscribe and hit that bell icon for my irregular upload schedule. Do not forget to vote on what hero you'd like to see next. This is important because I don't know how long it'll take to finish the next hero, so it might as well be the one that you want. But with all that out of the way, thank you all for watching, and I will see you next time. Peace.